Ну вот, Олег, ты молодец. Сегодня уже намного лучше, сам видишь.
Hey everyone, welcome back. And today we have a real special guest. Dr. Diuretics is here. And he is a
Нет, вот
keto.
у тебя надо, пошел нахер. Ну что, деньги что ли? Из кошелька делаешь, что ли? Так нет, он... Ты что, смеешься? Кто здесь, где, какого надо? Тяжело как-то, что-то неудобно вообще. Зеленский что-то. А, это он, ну.
Hi guys, I'm back. In this video, we're going to talk about the 13 insulin triggers. Okay. Now, as
Нет,
you
не
may
касается,
know,
да.
insulin is behind so many health problems. And if you can just understand all the triggers and avoid these things, you can be very, very healthy. So what I did is on this book, I summarized all the triggers increasing insulin. We need normal insulin. We don't need excessive amounts of insulin. So when you have high levels of insulin, it causes the receptor that it's supposed to be received in to downgrade and become resistive and block. So that's called insulin resistance. And then it sends a signal back to the pancreas, increasing your insulin. So you have a situation where you have too much insulin, yet it's ineffective, it's not working, okay? Okay, so let's start with number one, sugar. And I'm talking about all the sugars, okay? Like dextrose, high fructose corn syrup, table sugar, brown sugar, raw sugar, honey, all the sugars. Number two, refined grains in the form of breads, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, things like that. Number three, frequency of eating. Every time you eat, you trigger insulin. So the more times you eat, the worse it is. That's why we do intermittent fasting. Number four, there's an insulin scale that measures all the non-carbohydrate things that can trigger insulin. And lean proteins will trigger insulin more than fattier proteins. So you don't want to focus on lean, low-fat protein. You want to get the whole fat in there as nature has provided. Number five, excessive protein. Too much protein can trigger insulin. So the optimum amount is between 3 and 6 ounces. If you're a real big guy, or you're doing intermittent fasting, you're having less frequent meals, then consume a little bit more. But don't, try not to go too much. Number 6, soy oil, which most definitely is genetically modified, and even corn oil and other oils as well. But it's sprayed with glyphosate. Okay, this is an herbicide, Roundup Ready, part of the GMO thing. So we want to avoid soy oil because that can trigger insulin resistance and then spike insulin. Trans fats, that's all hydrogenated oils. You want to avoid all that. That can actually cause insulin resistance and increase insulin. Cortisol, that's the adrenal stress hormone. And that includes all the medication that has cortisol in a synthetic version, like prednisone shots, cortisol creams, things like that, steroids. Number 9, diuretics. So many people are on high blood pressure medication, and they use a diuretic, which gets rid of fluid. But one of the side effects, it causes insulin resistance, which then increases your insulin, causing more blood pressure. Okay. Number 10, statins. It's a cholesterol medication. Causes insulin resistance, increasing insulin, thereby increasing cholesterol. It's crazy. Number 11, MSG, monosodium glutamate. Another name for that would be modified food starch. It's in so many foods. It's in fast food restaurants. It's in a lot of other restaurants. So if the food tastes a bit too good, suspect MSG and avoid it because it can increase insulin. This is probably why you go to a Chinese restaurant and you eat, and an hour later you're starving. Why? Because the blood sugars go down, and now you're hungry again. Okay, you're not satisfied. Number 12 and 13 are mineral deficiencies and vitamin deficiencies can set you up for insulin resistance and thereby increase insulin. So low potassium deficiencies, magnesium deficiencies, low sodium or low salt diets can increase the risk of getting insulin resistance. So this is one of the things that doctors recommend, go on a low salt diet, thereby creating higher insulin, which then causes the retention of sodium. Crazy. Okay, zinc deficiency. You need zinc to make insulin. Zinc is necessary to support the cells that make insulin, the beta cells. In fact, the number 1 cell in the body that absorbs the most zinc is the cells that make insulin, the beta cells. So if you're low on zinc, it can set you up for diabetes. Okay, low chromium can do it. High levels of calcium can cause insulin resistance. Low B1, thiamine, low vitamin D, and low vitamin A. Alright, so here you have it. These are the things that can set you up for insulin resistance and increase insulin. Hey guys, a lot of you already have my book, some of you don't, but this new edition called the New Body Types Guide is an upgrade from my last edition called the 7 Principles of Fat Burning. It has 156 images, 378 pages, full glossary. I talk about keto, intermittent fasting, the body types in detail. I have a new stress chapter. I'm going to show you exactly what to eat and a comprehensive FAQ. I put a link down below. Check it out.
Все образы, что можно представить, можно купить на Озон. Заказывайте с бесплатной доставкой и удобной примеркой.
Девушка, я говорю доставлено. Ваши вещи доставлены.
В Совкомбанке для владельцев недвижимости все просто. Больше денег, меньше процент.
Сами попробуйте.
Кредит до 30 миллионов рублей для владельцев недвижимости. Оформить онлайн на совкомбанк.ру.
Lipid profiles, tumors can consume ketones, reduce oxidative stress, and more O2, less CO2. And then you have the benefits of reduction of insulin, which is the common denominator of so many health problems. I mean, inflammatory conditions, heart, of course diabetes, the fatty liver, high cholesterol, aneurysms, stroke, dementia. Other than that, it doesn't have any effects. But it's actually pretty connected to everything. So you get to do these two things. There's you know about the glycemic index. So I recently had someone comment on one of my videos, if rice is so bad, Why are the Chinese so thin, right? Well, the Chinese are not as thin as you think. From 1985 to 2015, there was a massive spike of obesity in children. And I'm not even talking about being overweight. I'm talking about classified as obese. For boys, it was an increase by 14 times. And for girls, the obesity increase was 11x. That's crazy. I mean, the Chinese once were considered one of the leanest populations of the entire world. Now it's ranked second behind the US. I wonder why. Well, because they're eating like Americans. So yes, the Chinese always consumed rice, okay? But let's just take a look at what they consumed in the early 90s versus right now. It was a lot less sugar, 1.7 kilograms of sugar. Now it's 7.7 kilograms of sugar. They consumed a lot more vegetables than they do now. They consumed fish, a lot of seafood. Food was primarily boiled as compared to now it's fried. They consumed more fermented foods like natto, miso, kimchi. Now it's a lot less. And the Western food and beverage companies helped shape the science and public policy on obesity in China. So the recent trends in America of consuming soda is actually going down. So the beverage companies now are marketing heavily in other countries like Mexico and especially China. So in China, there is a lot more sugar being consumed, a lot more snacking going on. Also, the amount of soy. Back in 1995, 14 tons of soy consumed, and it was non-GMO. Now, it's actually 70 million tons, with the majority of that being imported. And most of it's going to be GMO. China actually produces half of the world's pork, and most of the pigs are fed soy. So in summary, the Chinese are not getting thinner, they're getting fatter. It's not because of the rice, it's because of the sugar and the refined carbohydrates, and the soy products are also contributing to this problem as well. Hey, if you're liking this content, please subscribe now, and I will actually keep you updated on future videos.
Получите квартиру в Москве. Закажите бесплатную дебетовую альфа-карту Visa. Каждая покупка – шанс выиграть.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Chris. They said it couldn't be done, but you can do it because this is actually a real mensch. This guy actually, there aren't too many Stanford people I would agree with, but Chris is one of them. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the invitation. This is the problem of the millennium. And in the last, 50 years, we have gone from a society that basically cooked at home, prepared its own food, to now a society that doesn't even know how to cook. We've lost an important, and I would say seminal and integral component of our lifestyle in the process of basically two-parent working families, shuttling kids back and forth to and from this activity, that activity, and of course the money that has gone out the window in terms of processed food and in terms of healthcare. So I want to today take a step backward and do for you what Chris and I do on a daily basis. How many of you in the room today are scientists? How many of you use the scientific method in your daily lives or in your research? A couple of you, okay? Well, for those of you who don't, I have to describe for you what it is that we do in order for you to understand how we've come to such a conclusion as what's on this title slide, an experiment that failed. So you have to understand what an experiment is, and you have to know what success or failure is. So let me take you through that. So here's a slide of sort of what I do on a daily basis. You pose a hypothesis based on the data that's currently available, and you say, this must be true, and I'm going to test it by setting up a procedure that will evaluate that hypothesis and exclude all confounders. So you design the experiment and you determine what the outcome should be a priori, and you then either support or you refute that hypothesis. Right? You assess the baseline parameters before you walk into the experiment, and so you know where you're starting, so you know what the change will be over the course of the experiment. You carry out the experiment and you gather the data as you go, and you figure out what's going on during the course of the experiment so that you can ultimately work backwards to figure out what happened if you need to. You assess the outcome parameters as you reach the end of whatever the interval that you were studying was. And if the outcome is as expected, you publish it, you get grant money, and then you move on to the next experiment and the next hypothesis. That's great. And if the outcome is not as expected, which is about 10 times more likely than the experiment actually working, your job is to figure out what happened. What went wrong? Was it because the procedure itself was flawed and you couldn't actually get the data out of it that you thought, because it's garbage in, garbage out? Or was it because the hypothesis was flawed and you need to move on to another hypothesis? So you have to ask the question, do I want to repeat the experiment and do it differently, or do I want to do a completely different experiment? And that's the situation that all scientists face when an experiment fails, which is virtually all the time. Everybody got it? That's what I have to do. That's what Chris has to do. That's what the people who raise their hands have to do. Okay? And I'll tell you, it's a hell of a way to make a living. But that's what we do. All right? So let's imagine that the food industry 50 years ago posed a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is illustrated on this slide right here, that processed food is better than real food. That's what they said 50 years ago. And they said it for a whole bunch of different reasons, and we understand what those reasons are. And we've adopted a lot of those reasons, and we've sort of inculcated those into our daily lives. Now, what are the outcomes that you have to look at to determine whether or not this hypothesis is correct? Well, you have to look at consumption. Did consumption go up? Yes or no? Did health improve? Yes or no? Did the environment get better or worse? And finally, cash flow. Did companies make money? Did consumers save money? And did society do well or not? These are the questions that ultimately will determine the success or failure of this experiment. Everybody got it? So that's what we're going to analyze today, because the food industry refuses to. So we're going to do it for them. Got it? Okay. So here's the experiment. 1965. Everybody remember these? Okay, Swanson TV dinners. The first ultra-processed, marketed fast food. Processed food, and it was in everybody's home. And they told us that this was going to liberate women from the kitchen. Now, has it? Yeah, it sort of has. And that's one of the reasons why we have two-parent working families now, and nobody to shuttle your kids and all the daycare and everything else. In fact, it did liberate women from the kitchen, because if we didn't have those, they probably still would be in the kitchen. Whether that's a good thing or not is up to your own decision making. And spam, everybody knows spam, right? That was 50 years ago. Okay? This is what we have now, and everybody recognizes all of these. Okay? So the processed food industry has certainly advanced and evolved over the past 50 years to provide us with all of this fare, which we are now consuming. But what's interesting is, with all of the different processed food that's out there for us to be able to choose from today, how many companies do you think make those? No, it turns out there are 10. And here they are. Okay? Kraft, Coke, Pepsi, Kellogg's, Mars, Unilever, J&J, P&G, and Nestle. They control 90% of the food distribution and marketing in this country. These 10 conglomerates. And to be honest with you, they all do the exact same thing. very interesting. So basically, our food has been uniformly changed over the past 50 years. A very good experiment in terms of before and after. So let's talk about that. Okay? So here's what processed food is. Number one, it has to be mass-produced. Okay? On a big scale. You know, we're not talking about individual chefs here. We're talking about, you know, conglomerates. Anybody ever been to a food processing plant? You have, huh? What was it like? It's a plant. Are there any windows? There are no windows. Why is that? Why are there no windows in a food processing plant? Because they don't want you to see what's going on in there. Because if you did, you wouldn't eat it. Okay? Truly. You can't believe what's going on there. There is not one piece of machinery that is recognizable that would be in a normal kitchen. Nothing. Nada. It's fascinating. Really very interesting. It has to be consistent batch to batch. Because, not just batch to batch, but in fact, location to location, because they're making it in different places. Okay? Has to be consistent.
Да.
For obvious reasons, like McDonald's.
Никто делает, да. Да, понимаю.
Brand and stuff to, you know,
Да.
convey a certain
Ну да.
taste.
Типа того, да.
Specialized ingredients from
Это не надо,
specialized-
просто надо быть начеку, понимаешь? Эволюция не остановилась, понимаешь? И то, что ты видишь по телевизору, оно, скорее всего, как бы падает, скорее всего, понимаешь? Да, даже я тоже, я болтун же. То есть единственное, за что я цепился, что я что-то умею, как бы, и дальше хочу уметь, и так далее. Да, и у всех есть такие, как бы, да, возможности, да. Не касается, да. То есть, да. Спокойной ночи, отдыхайте. Как это? Мне все напоминает, помнишь, что ты, да, да, спокойствие, да, отдыхайте, спите, кушайте, ебите, телевизоры смотрите, как бы. Нет, это не специально. Ты обязан покупать это все, да, понимаешь. Тут как бы две крайности. То есть, поэтому, да, то есть страх тебя вот так вот будет туда-сюда, никуда, да, понимаешь. Да, то есть, понимаешь, везде обман, самообман. Нет, не самообман, да, но меня не касается. Ну да, да, ничего страшного, это все временно. Вот сегодня ты самообманываешься, завтра такой, блин, сам себя опозорился там, ну или, да, потом такое осознание, блин, как-то нормально, да, есть коллективный взгляд, коллективное эго, может быть, да, и, которое у тебя тоже есть. Тебе, если надо было, тоже понял тебя просто, что, да. Ну да, наверное, да, типа того. Ну, световой прием, говорит, надо тебя просто, я думаю, да, понимаешь. Ну, наверное, да. Да, да. Но ты так не уповай, ни на что уповать вообще нельзя здесь. Ты понимаешь, да, да. Даже женщине, к сожалению. К радости, да, понимает. Да, вот это я тоже не говорил, да, понимаешь. Жизнь ты ведь, понимаешь, никто не мог этого придумать просто вообще. Так наоборот, да, ну ладно, не кстати. Да не надо, и все время будет все вокруг этого, что надо что-то работать, что-то как шире и выгодно останавливать, вот так вот постоянно, ни о чем щиной, да, понимаешь. А иначе надо, ну, вот эти говорят, да, понимаешь, специалисты по работе. Ну, ладно, не касается, аж все. Ну, да, страх, он ничего не делает, понимаешь. Женщина, они хороши в стадисе, но это совсем не обязательно страх. Наверное, не знаю я. Не знаю, для самих себя плохие они, все время забываешь, что у мужчин есть два пола, Не надо. Ладно, выпей. Бай-бай. Тебе он говорит. Да, нет. Да, поймешь меня. Но вот это он и был самый. Да. Ну да, просто. Понимаете, он просто. Да, он надо истерить. Да, понял, тебе говорит. Спать прошу. Что еще какой-то, да, понимаете, ну, 20 говорит, что да. Ну, это есть, не, вот видишь, порождение чего, да, просто страх его.